My son's voice cut through the church like a knife. Don't think for a second you'll ever see a cent from Mom's fortune. She made sure of that. When friends of them, laughter rippled from a few distant relatives. Sharp and cruel. My knees felt weak, but I stood still at the back of the crowded chapel, staring at the casket draped in white roses. My wife, Margaret, lay inside, silent now. The woman I had once built a life with, the woman who raised our son, the same son who now looked at me as if I was less than a stranger. I opened my mouth, but the words refused to come. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the shame his words forced upon me. Faces turned, whispers spread like fire. To them, I was the deserter, the man who had abandoned his family, who had left his wife to carry the weight of the world alone. They didn't know the truth, or maybe they never cared to ask. As I stepped forward, my son moved with a calculated precision. His polished shoes clicked against the marble, his hand tightening into a fist. The anger in his eyes was no accident. He wanted this moment. He wanted me small, humiliated, broken in front of everyone. The air felt heavy. The silence after his words pressed down like stone. I tried to steady my breath, but the memory of every failure, every missed birthday, every unanswered call came crashing back. I had come only to say goodbye. But now, I realized this was not only a funeral, it was a trial, and my own son was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I was only 21 when I first saw Margaret. It was a crisp fall morning on campus at the University of Michigan. The leaves were painted in shades of gold and crimson, scattered across the old stone paths, like a carpet laid just for her. She stood under a tall oak tree, holding a stack of books against her chest, and I swear the world seemed quieter around her. I had seen beautiful girls before, but she had something else, a calmness, a focus. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and maybe that was why she did. I was an awkward business major, more comfortable with spreadsheets than conversations. She was studying literature, already known among professors as the brightest in her class. I remember walking past her 3 times that day, trying to build the courage to say hello. Finally, she looked up, caught me staring, and smiled. That single smile was enough to undo me. We talked about nothing at first. About the weather, about the dull cafeteria food, about how the library always smelled of dust and coffee. But by the time I walked her to her dorm, I felt like I had known her for years. She had a way of making me feel seen, like my fumbling words mattered. That night I couldn't sleep. Her laughter echoed in my head, soft and unguarded. I wanted to hear it again. So the next morning I waited outside her lecture hall. She looked surprised but not displeased. We got coffee. 1 cup turned into 3. Hours passed without notice. She told me about her dreams of becoming a writer. She said, stories had power, that they could change the way people see themselves. I told her about my simple goals. A steady job, a small house, a family. She didn't laugh. She listened, and she told me she believed I would be a good father one day. From then on, we were inseparable. Study sessions turned into late-night walks across campus. We explored old bookstores, hidden diners, and the quiet corners of the city where she would read me passages from her favorite novels. I teased her for carrying heavy books everywhere, but she would smile and say, someday I'll write one of my own, and you'll be the first to read it. Our first kiss happened by accident. We had been walking back from a movie, the snow just beginning to fall. I slipped on the icy sidewalk, and she caught my arm. For a moment we stood close, her breath warm against my cheek. I don't know who leaned in first, but when our lips met, It felt like the world had been holding its breath just for that moment. By the spring of our senior year, I knew I couldn't let her go. I bought a modest ring with the money I had saved from my part-time job at a hardware store. I was terrified she would think it wasn't enough. But when I knelt down in the small park near campus, her eyes filled with tears before I even said a word. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. They will 80-10. We married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at her parents' backyard. There were no expensive decorations, no orchestra, no grand hall, just fairy lights strung between trees, a borrowed speaker playing our favorite songs, and the people who mattered most. I remember the way she looked at me that night, barefoot on the grass, holding my hand as if she was holding the future itself. Our honeymoon was nothing fancy. A road trip across the Midwest in my beat-up old Ford. We stayed in cheap motels, ate greasy burgers, and laughed until our stomachs hurt. She kept a notebook with her the whole time, scribbling down lines about sunsets, diners, and the way my hand never left hers when I drove. Those early days were pure. We had nothing but each other. And somehow, that felt like enough. Every small victory was shared. Every setback faced together. When the power went out in our tiny apartment, we lit candles and read books aloud. When I failed my first job interview, she cooked spaghetti and told me I was meant for something better. When her first short story was rejected by a magazine, I stayed up all night telling her that her words mattered, that one rejection couldn't define her. I believed with all my heart that our life would always be that way, simple, joyful, full of shared dreams. I didn't know then how fragile it all was, how the same love that made us strong could also be tested, bent, even broken. But in those moments, sitting on the floor of our apartment, eating instant noodles with her head resting on my shoulder, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. And for a while, I truly was. We moved into a small second-floor apartment above a florist on Liberty Street. The place smelled like roses in the morning and like wet cardboard after rain. The pipes knocked, the windows stuck, and the oven leaned to one side. We made it ours with a second-hand table and a couch that sagged in the middle. Margaret taped her poems to the fridge with blue painter tape and said the room felt bigger when words were on the walls. I found work at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town. I stacked pallets, learned the layout, and kept notes in a pocket notebook. I watched how the supervisors solved problems and how the best workers paced themselves. Margaret took a job at the public library. She led story hour with a warm voice. Children leaned closer when she read. After closing time, she wrote at a small desk near the travel section. On weekends, we hunted yard sales for a dining set and real plates. We saved every spare dollar in a jar in the back of the pantry. We named the jar the house. When we shook it, the coins sounded like rain on a tin roof. Sometimes we counted the bills and then put them back. The ritual felt like a promise to our future selves. The winter we turned 23. Margaret guided my hand to her belly. It was a flutter at first, then a steady drum. We cried and laughed at the same time. At night I lay awake listening to her breathe and pictured a baby with her calm eyes. We painted the spare room a soft blue that looked gray at dusk. I assembled a crib with a tiny wrench and too much pride. Caleb arrived in late spring during a thunderstorm. The hospital lights were bright and kind. I counted the seconds between lightning while Margaret squeezed my fingers and told me to stop counting. When they placed him on her chest, the room changed. It did not grow louder or softer. It just felt true. He opened his eyes and made a small sound that broke me open in the best way. Life shifted into a new rhythm. I took the early shift so I could be home before dusk. I wore Caleb in a carrier while I cooked pasta and oversalted everything. Margaret learned to type with one hand while the baby slept against her shoulder. Her first short story was accepted by a regional magazine. We framed the letter and hung it above the changing table. By the time Caleb turned 1, I had been promoted to operations coordinator. I did not chase a title. I wanted to be useful. I studied logistics after Caleb fell asleep. I learned to forecast demand and to negotiate truck routes. My boss said I had a steady way about me, the kind that calms a busy floor. Margaret started a small reading night at a corner cafe. The owner said yes if we could guarantee a crowd. We printed flyers on the library copier and walked them door to door. On the first night it rained, but the chairs still filled. Margaret stood in front with her notebook, hair pulled back, voice clear. When she finished, the room held still, and then came the softest applause. I washed cups in the back sink and felt 10 feet tall. Our dreams were not grand. They were precise. We wanted a 2-bedroom bungalow with a fenced yard and a maple that turned red in October. We wanted to pay cash for a used car that would start every time. We wanted 1 weekend trip to the lake each summer and a second child when we were ready. We kept a list on the fridge with boxes to check. We did not rush. We made the bed every morning. We said grace over takeout when we were too tired to cook. The day we closed on the house, the realtor handed us a key, tied with a ribbon. The rooms were empty and echoed when we laughed. We ordered pizza and ate it on the floor. Caleb toddled from room to room with a wooden spoon. We found a faint pencil mark on the pantry door from years ago. We left it and added our own marks the following spring. There were arguments too. Money ran thin. The car needed brakes. Margaret's second story was rejected by the same magazine that had loved the first. I missed bath time 3 nights in a row because a delivery broke down on Route 2. We talked in the kitchen with the lights off, so the house felt smaller and less sharp. She cried, and I held her until the heater kicked on. We learned to say "I am sorry" in plain language. We learned to mean it. One night we sat on the back steps with the baby monitor humming. The sky was a deep violet. Our shoulders touched. Margaret said she wanted to found a small press one day. She wanted to publish working-class voices and first books and stories that made people feel less alone. I told her I wanted to run a warehouse that moved with the care of a family. I wanted everyone to know they mattered. She took my hand and said that sounded like a kind of art. When Caleb turned 3, we planted 2 birch saplings in the yard. We gave them names and watched how the sun moved across the grass each season. On rough days, we put our palms on the white bark and stayed quiet until the world felt manageable again. It was a small ritual, but it worked. We had a life. It was not fancy. It was not easy. It was ours. It began quietly, the way most fractures do. A small delay in my paycheck. A notice from the bank about a late fee. A grocery bill that stretched farther than the week allowed. At first, Margaret would smile and say, "It's just a rough month." I would kiss her forehead and promise it would get better. For a while, that was enough. But the rough months stacked on top of each other. My promotion had brought more hours, more responsibility. But the raise was thin. Trucks broke down. Suppliers pulled out. And I found myself staying late more often, convincing drivers to cover routes, scribbling numbers that never balanced. I came home past midnight, shoes heavy with dust, and collapsed into bed without a word. Margaret was changing too. Her readings at the cafe had grown popular. She was asked to host events at other venues. People praised her voice, her words, her grace. She glowed in those rooms, and I could not deny I felt proud. But with pride came something else. Distance. She was gone most evenings. And when she came home, she carried conversations from another world, names I did not know, plans I could not follow. At the dinner table, Caleb chattered about preschool while Margaret scrolled through her phone. I would try to tell a story from work, and her eyes would drift. "That sounds tough," she said, but her tone was automatic, her mind elsewhere. I learned to keep my words short. The house we had worked so hard for began to feel tight. The roof needed repair. The furnace groaned each winter night. Caleb grew fast. His shoes worn through quicker than we could replace them. We dipped into the savings jar labeled college, telling ourselves it was temporary. But the jar never filled again. We fought about little things first. The pile of laundry in the corner, the bills stacked unopened on the counter, the way she left the porch light on. But under those fights lived the real ones. Her frustration that I wasn't home enough. My fear that she didn't need me anymore. We raised our voices more often, sometimes within earshot of Caleb. His big eyes watched us, silent. And that silence cut deeper than any words. One winter night, I came home to find Margaret pacing the living room. Papers spread across the coffee table. I got an offer, she said. A small press in Chicago wanted her to edit a new collection. It would mean travel, meetings, late nights. She spoke fast, her hands moving, her eyes bright. I wanted to be happy for her, but all I could see was the gap widening between us. Who's going to be here with Caleb? I asked. My voice was harsher than I meant. Her face fell. I'm not abandoning him, she said. I'm trying to build something for us. But in that moment, it didn't feel like us anymore. The cracks widened. I stayed longer at work, not only because I had to, but because I didn't know how to be home with her anymore. She accepted more invitations, more readings, more time away. We moved like shadows through the same rooms, brushing past each other with polite words, saving our real voices for others. One night, the car broke down on the highway. I called her 3 times, but she didn't answer. By the time I got home hours later, walking from the service station, I found her asleep on the couch, the phone still on the table beside her. I stood there, watching, wondering when we had stopped being each other's first call. I told myself every marriage went through seasons, that we would find our way back. I held on to that hope the way a drowning man clutches driftwood. But deep down, I knew the foundation was shifting. Love had not disappeared, but it was buried under resentment, exhaustion, and unspoken fears. The birch trees in the yard stood taller each spring, their white bark peeling in thin curls. Sometimes I touched them, remembering the promises we whispered when we planted them. Promises of a steady life, of a family that would always stand together. I wanted to believe the trees would remind us, but even they could not hold us upright as the storms gathered. The night it all changed was ordinary at first. Caleb was asleep. The dishwasher hummed, and the air carried that faint mix of detergent and winter drafts. I came home earlier than usual, a rare gift, holding a bag of takeout from her favorite Thai place. I wanted to surprise her, to break the pattern of silence. But Margaret wasn't in the living room. She wasn't in the kitchen either. The glow came from her office down the hall. I pushed the door gently, smiling, ready to set the food on her desk. The smile froze when I saw the screen. A message, open and careless, glowing in the dark. I can't stop thinking about last night. Your laugh, your touch. I need you again. Cantor. It was signed with a name I recognized only faintly. Daniel, the poet she had once invited to her reading nights. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood, but scrolling through the thread, I saw months of words, plans, confessions, moments shared that were never meant for me. The bag of food slipped from my hand and spilled across the carpet. Margaret's head snapped up. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Then the screen. She closed the laptop too late. The truth was already between us, heavy and unshakable. What is this? My voice cracked. Raw. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Finally, she whispered. It's not what you think. He's edited. I laughed. But it wasn't laughter. It was a broken sound. Sharp and bitter. Not what I think. You've been with him. He's edited. Tears filled her eyes. But anger came first. You don't understand. He listens. He sees me. He knows what I carry. He's edited. And I don't? My voice rose. I've carried boxes. Debts. Double shifts. I've carried this family while you chased stages and strangers. Don't tell me I don't understand. He's edited. Her hands trembled. You gave up on us long before this. You were never here. And Lukshan so then, the words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. In the doorway, Caleb appeared, rubbing his eyes. Mom, Dad? His small voice shattered what was left of me. Margaret rushed to him, pulling him close, whispering it was nothing, just an argument. But he looked at me with fear I had never seen before. That night I slept in the guest room. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, hearing muffled sobs from down the hall. The air was thick with everything we hadn't said. Every promise broken, the days after blurred together. We tried to talk, tried to stitch the wound with explanations and apologies. But every word reopened it. She said Daniel made her feel alive. I said she had killed everything we built. We circled the same arguments until they turned poisonous. At family dinners, Caleb watched in silence as we picked at our plates. He asked fewer questions, retreated into his room, clutched his toys like they were shields. I tried to hold him, to promise him it would be okay, but even at 8 years old, he seemed to know promises were fragile. One evening I found Margaret in the yard, staring at the birch trees we had planted. Her face was pale, her shoulders slumped. I don't know how we got here, she whispered. Because you walked away, I said. She turned to me, her eyes red. And you let me. He was not they've in. He was not they've in. It is not thus. There was no shouting then, just quiet truth, spoken. The counselor's office smelled like tea and old carpet. We sat on opposite sides of the couch. Margaret held a tissue in one hand and her phone. The counselor asked us to speak in turns. I said I wanted to fix our marriage. Margaret said she was tired of feeling unseen. I said I would change my hours. She said time was not the problem anymore. We tried for 3 sessions. Each one peeled back a layer we could not hold together. I talked about the warehouse and the nights I drove home with my chest tight from worry. She talked about rooms where people listened to every word she said, and how she felt alive. I heard the truth and still felt helpless. The counselor said we needed a plan. I nodded even as the plan slid away. The 4th session never happened. Margaret called that morning and said she could not sit on that couch again. She had made a list. She wanted a legal separation. She wanted the house. She wanted primary custody. She said I would see Caleb every other weekend and 1 night a week. Her words were clean and exact. The papers arrived 2 days later by certified mail. I signed them at the kitchen table where we used to set birthday cakes. My hand shook as I wrote my name. I looked at the pantry door and the lines we had made to mark Caleb's height. I touched the newest line and pulled back. We explained it to Caleb on a Sunday evening. He held his stuffed dog and asked if he had done something wrong. We told him no. We told him we both loved him. He asked why love could not live in the same house. I could not answer. Margaret said we would always be a family. He frowned at the word always. I moved into a 1-bedroom rental near the river. The carpet was thin and the refrigerator hummed. I bought a second-hand bed and a small desk. In the first week I woke at 3 and reached for a body that was not there. The court dates came quick. We sat across from each other at a long table. Her attorney spoke in a calm voice. Mine spoke about fairness and time. The judge asked about mediation. We said yes. The judge said our son needed stability. When the order was read, my ears rang. Alternate weekends. Wednesday. Dinners. Holidays split by a schedule that did not care about how Christmas feels when your child leaves at noon. I wanted to argue for more. But my attorney shook his head. He said we could revisit later. Moving day was quiet. I boxed my clothes, my books, the set of mugs we bought on our road trip. I left the couch. I left the wedding china. I paused in Caleb's room. There was a model airplane we had glued together. The wing still had a smear of paint. I put it in my box and then set it back on his shelf. He should not have to visit the past at my apartment. Margaret kept her eyes down as we loaded the car. Daniel was not there. I was grateful for that small mercy. When the trunk closed for the last time, she looked up. For a second I saw the girl from the campus lawn. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. I nodded. She nodded. The first Wednesday dinner was simple. I picked up Caleb from school. We ate burgers at a diner with red vinyl seats. He told me about a science project. I told him about a forklift certification. He laughed when I mimed the beeping sound. On the drive back, he grew quiet. He asked if I was lonely. I told him the truth. Yes. He took my hand and held it for 3 blocks. Then he let go at the light. At night in the rental, I learned new habits. I folded laundry the same day. I cooked enough for 2 and saved the rest for my next night with him. I walked by the river before dawn. I wanted to move like that. Steady and honest. The day the divorce became final, I received an email. My attorney said the decree was signed. He said a copy would come by mail. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I went outside and stood under a small maple near the parking lot. Leaves moved in a small wind. That night I took a cardboard box from the closet and filled it with things that still carried her name. Old letters. A dried flower from our wedding. A Polaroid from the day we closed on the house. I did not throw them away. I put the box on a high shelf. The next weekend was my weekend. Caleb and I built a fort from blankets and chairs. We ate cereal out of mugs and watched an old baseball game. He fell asleep on my chest before the 6th inning. I listened to his breath and thought about vows. I whispered that I was sorry into his hair. He stirred and did not wake. When I returned him on Sunday evening, the porch light was on. Margaret stood in the doorway. She thanked me for the extra pair of gloves. Her voice was careful. Caleb ran inside and yelled about the fort. She smiled and then looked at me. There was a question in her eyes. I said good night. She said good night. The door clicked shut. Back at the rental, I washed the mugs and folded the blankets. I sat at the small desk and wrote a list titled, What Remains? Caleb's laugh. My work. The river at dawn. 2 birch trees in a yard that is no longer mine. I put the pen down and let the room be quiet. Then I made the bed and turned off the light. Time has a way of stretching when you are alone. The first months after the divorce felt like years. And the first years felt like a lifetime I had never asked for. My apartment was too quiet. The fridge hummed and the pipes rattled. But without laughter or arguments or Caleb's small footsteps, the silence became heavy. I kept the television on just to fill the air. Most nights, I didn't watch. I just let the voices speak so I wouldn't feel the walls closing in. I worked longer hours at the warehouse. Promotions came, not because I chased them, but because no one else wanted to stay late and cover endless shifts. I became dependable in the way tired men often do. I earned more money, but money didn't buy me the nights I missed with my son. Wednesdays and weekends were never enough. I tried to make those visits special, but the schedule turned them into performances instead of life. I felt like a guest in my own child's world. Caleb grew taller each year, his voice deeper, his eyes harder to read. On the playground, he stopped holding my hand. At dinners, he spent more time on his phone than looking at me. Once, when I reminded him to finish his homework, he snapped. "You're not here enough to tell me what to do." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Margaret thrived in those years. Her books gained attention. I saw her face on posters outside the library, in articles shared online. People called her brilliant, a voice for her generation. I felt proud and bitter all at once. She had found the recognition she always wanted. But in doing so, she had pulled further away from the life we once built together. At school events, I stood at the edges while she took the center. Parents whispered, admiring her. Caleb stayed close to her side. Sometimes he introduced me as his dad, but often he didn't. I tried to smile through it, but every time I drove home alone afterward, I gripped the steering wheel so tight my hands ached. Holidays were the worst. I celebrated Christmas morning with Caleb, then drove him back before dinner. The house always felt colder when I returned. The wrapping paper still on the floor. I would heat leftovers, pour a glass of whiskey, and tell myself this was temporary, that one day things would be different. But each year passed, and nothing changed. Friends drifted away. Couples we used to know invited Margaret to gatherings. Not me. At work, the younger guys invited me out for beers, but I usually declined. I told myself I was too tired. But the truth was, I couldn't face being the divorced man with nothing to say, except stories about schedules and court orders. I found rituals to keep myself steady. Early walks by the river. A notebook where I wrote letters I never sent to Margaret, to Caleb, to the man I used to be. I filled pages with apologies, explanations, promises. Sometimes I burned the letters after writing them. Watching the smoke curl against the night sky, it was the only way I knew how to let go, even if only for a moment. One summer, I drove past our old house. The birch trees had grown tall, their white bark gleaming in the sunlight. A bicycle leaned against the porch. Through the window, I saw Caleb laughing with friends. For a moment, I thought about knocking on the door, but I didn't. I sat in the car, hidden, and watched. It hurt, but it also reminded me that he was alive, happy, moving forward. Even if I wasn't there for every moment, the years etched lines into my face. But the deeper marks were the ones inside. Regret settled into my bones. Regret for not fighting harder, for not holding on tighter, for not being the father Caleb needed me to be. I told myself there was still time, that someday he would understand. But as the distance grew, so did the fear that someday might never come. I lived like that for almost a decade, half a father, half a man, waiting for something to change. And then, one morning, the phone rang, carrying the news that would shatter everything I thought I had left. The call came at 7 a.m. A woman with a careful voice said she was from St. Luke's and that Margaret was gone. Cardiac arrest in her sleep. There were no last words to hold. There was only a hard edge of silence. I put the phone down and sat at the edge of the bed. Light pushed through the blinds. I drove without music. The city moved around me like it always did. People waited for buses. I wanted to shake the world and tell it to stop for 1 hour. It did not stop. At the parish office, a man wrote dates on a form and asked about hymns. I wrote Margaret's name in a neat hand and felt like I was forging it. The chapel held a sweet smell of lilies. White roses rested on the closed casket. A photo of her stood on an easel. She was laughing in the picture. I had taken it at the lake years ago. Her hair was blown across her cheek. She had been mocking my grill skills. I touched the frame and told her I was sorry. The words fell to the carpet and stayed there. People came in dark clothes and quiet shoes. Colleagues from the university press. Writers from the cafe readings. Neighbors I did not know. They hugged me and said she was a light. I nodded and tried to agree. My chest felt like a fist. I searched the doorway for Caleb. He arrived with 2 friends and stood beside his aunt. His suit was sharp, his jaw tight. He did not look at me. The service began with a hymn she loved. I could not sing. The priest spoke about good work and the power of words. He did not speak of nights on a kitchen floor, or of birch trees in a yard, or the way a laugh could be a home. When it was time for remarks, her sister read a page from one of Margaret's essays. People wiped their eyes. Then Caleb walked to the lectern. He looked steady at first. His voice was low and clear. He spoke about her courage and her books, and the way she never missed a promise. He said she taught him to do hard things. Then his eyes found me near the back. The room thinned. He paused, and the pause turned into a judgment. He said a father should protect a family, and that his mother had learned to protect herself. The words were not shouted. They were worse because they were calm. Faces turned toward me like a tide. I wanted to stand up and say I had loved her. I wanted to say that love and failure lived together in us. That the story was not simple. I stayed quiet. Margaret taught me to honor a room. I kept my seat and let the words fall. My hands were cold. A woman in the next pew slid a tissue into my palm. I did not use it. I held it like a small white flag. After the closing prayer, we formed a slow line past the casket. When I reached the front, I set my wedding ring on the wood for a single beat and took it back. I whispered a promise to take better care of our son. I felt foolish and honest at once. At the exit, the sun hit hard. Cameras clicked. Not reporters. Only phones held by friends who could not help themselves. Caleb stood under a maple with his aunt. I walked toward them and stopped at a respectful distance. He noticed and stiffened. His aunt touched his arm. He pulled away and crossed his arms. His eyes were glass and steel. I said I was sorry. He said I was late. I checked my watch without meaning to, then wanted to throw it into the grass. I told him I would like to talk when he was ready. He said there was nothing to talk about. He turned his shoulders, and I became a shadow on the lawn. A woman in a navy suit approached me. She held a leather folder against her side. Her hair was pulled back. Her face kind the way a surgeon's face is kind. She introduced herself as Eleanor Park. She said she had worked with Margaret on estate documents. She asked if we could speak the next day. I felt the earth tilt. I said I did not expect to be needed. She said I was named. The word named made my throat tighten. She gave me a card with an address near downtown and a time. At the reception, I poured coffee and could not drink it. People told stories in soft voices. A man I had never met told me Margaret had mentored him. He wept and pressed my shoulder. I thanked him and felt like an imposter at the museum of her life. I watched Caleb from across the hall. He laughed at something his friend said, then looked toward me, and the laugh died. I stayed an hour, then left through the side door. At home, I opened the box on the high shelf. I lay the letters on the table and read the first 3. The paper smelled faintly of dry flowers. The words were careful and brave and unafraid to name pain. I could hear her in them. I folded the pages again and put the box away. I sat on the floor and let the light move across the wall. I tried to pray and could not find a line. That night a storm moved over the river. Rain tapped the window and then beat against it. I imagined the birch trees taking the wind, bending without breaking. I thought of the word named. I thought of what it might mean to be trusted when trust had been gone for so long. I did not sleep. I waited for morning and for the appointment with the lawyer who said my name as if it still belonged to me. The law office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower downtown. The lobby smelled of polished wood and ink. I sat in a chair too soft for my nerves, holding my hat in both hands. When Eleanor Park appeared, she greeted me with the same measured calm she'd shown at the funeral. "This won't take long," she said, though her eyes told me otherwise. The conference room was wide, with windows that looked out across the river. A long oak table stretched between us. Caleb sat at the far end, dressed in another sharp suit. His jaw was set, his gaze fixed on the floor. He did not nod when I entered. I wanted to speak, but Eleanor began before I could try. She read slowly, each word heavy, as though the paper itself carried weight. Margaret's voice was in those sentences. It was not the voice of the woman who had left me. It was the voice of the girl I once loved, the mother who sang to our son in the middle of the night. "To my beloved son, Caleb," she had written, "I leave the contents of our home, the family photographs, and a trust of $500,000 to help him begin his own journey. He has been my light, but he must also learn to build his own fire." And Caleb's head snapped up, confusion cutting through his mask. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then Eleanor continued, "To my former husband, David, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my royalties, my savings, and the rights to my unpublished manuscripts. I leave him not only these things, but also my request." 7. The words sank into me like stones. I gripped the arms of my chair, unsure whether to weep or protest. It made no sense. For years she had closed the door on me. Yet here was her hand reaching back, pressing something immense into mine. Caleb's chair screeched across the floor as he shot to his feet. "No, this is wrong." His voice trembled with fury. "She would never give him everything. He abandoned us. He doesn't deserve a dime." And, Eleanor folded her hands. "Your mother prepared this carefully. Witnesses were present. She recorded a statement on video. There can be no question of her intent." "Well, many." Caleb turned to me, eyes blazing. "What did you do to her? Did you beg? Did you twist her guilt until she signed this?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. "She wanted you to know the truth," Eleanor said gently. "She trusted your father in ways you may not yet understand." Her words were clear. "Well, many." Caleb's fists clenched at his sides. He looked at me with a hatred I had never seen, raw and burning. "You stole her from me once. Now you're stealing her again." The speaking. He stormed from the room, the door slamming behind him. The echo rattled in my chest. Eleanor closed the folder with deliberate care. "She believed in you," she said. "She believed you could carry what she could not finish." The speaking. I sat there long after she left, staring at the city through the glass. The world moved as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Margaret was gone. And yet she had given me a burden and a gift too heavy for my hands. I thought of our birch trees, of promises whispered long ago. I had failed her in life, but perhaps in death she was giving me one last chance to make something right. 2 days after the reading, a notice arrived. Caleb had retained counsel and was contesting the will. The paper named me as an interested party. The words felt cold in my hands. I walked to the river and watched the current take a fallen leaf. Then I called Eleanor and said I would follow her lead. The courthouse rose like a stone ship in the center of town. On the first morning, the hallway was full. Lawyers carried slim cases. A clerk called names in a voice that never changed. We sat at the same table but not together. Caleb did not look at me. His attorney smoothed his tie. Eleanor whispered that we would keep our voices calm and our answers plain. I nodded because plain was all I had left. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steady eyes. She asked for openings. Caleb's attorney rose. He told a story of neglect. He said I had abandoned a young family. He said the will was an act of guilt and confusion. He used the word undo until it sounded like thunder. He asked the court to protect a son who had been wronged not once but twice. Eleanor stood and did not tell a story. She offered proof. She placed dates on the record and described witnesses. She said the will had been drafted over months. She said Margaret had recorded a video on a clear afternoon in January. She said the doctor had written that Margaret's mind was sound. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. They called me first. I walked to the witness chair with a mouth that would not moisten. I swore to tell the truth and sat. Caleb's attorney began. He asked if I had been a perfect husband. I said no. He asked if I had ever raised my voice. I said yes. He asked if I had left the house before the divorce was final. I said yes. He nodded as if each answer placed another stone on my chest. Then he leaned forward and asked if I had known about the will. I said no. He asked if I had begged Margaret to change her will. I said I had not. Eleanor asked only a few questions. She asked how often I saw my son after the order. I said every other weekend and on Wednesdays. She asked what we did on those days. I said we built forts and fixed a small bicycle and learned to bake bread that rose when it wanted to. She asked if I had learned about the estate before the reading. I said no. The judge thanked me and I returned to my chair. They called Eleanor next to authenticate documents. They called the doctor who had seen Margaret for a yearly exam. He said she was lucid and focused. They played the video. It was short. Margaret sat at a plain table in a blue sweater. Her hair was tied back. She looked into the camera and spoke as if we were the only two people on earth. She said, "Our son is bright and capable." She said he needed to learn the weight of his own steps. She said I had been her witness for the good years and for the hard ones too. Caleb took the stand on the second day. He looked older there. His voice was strong. He said I was a ghost who knocked at doors on scheduled nights. He said his mother had built a life without me. He said a fortune should not reward absence. I believed his pain even as the words landed hard. Eleanor did not attack him. She only asked if he had watched the video twice. He said no. She asked if he had read the letter addressed to him that she now held. He said he had not seen it. The judge told him to read it now. He read in silence. His hands shook. In closing, Caleb's attorney said the law should bend to fairness. He said money could repair a wound that love had failed to close. He lifted a hand toward my son and asked the judge to see a young man who had been denied. Eleanor stood and said, "The law cannot replace love." She said the law can only honor choice when choice is proven. She asked the court to honor a woman who knew her mind. The judge took a long pause. She looked at the exhibits and at both of us. She said she had watched the video during the recess. She said the will was valid. She denied the petition. She asked us to breathe. She told us to speak to each other outside the language of court. There was no gavel. She simply stood. The room broke into soft motion. Caleb stared at the table as if it could open. I stood a few feet away and waited. He looked up. For a moment he was 10 again and afraid to enter a new classroom. I said his name. He flinched, and then he did not. He said one sentence. He said, "I do not know how to be your son." I said we can start with coffee. We met by a window in the hall. The city moved under us. He said he would not take my money. I said I was not offering money. I said I would offer a ride to work if his car failed. I said I would offer help moving. I said I would offer a place to sit when the world felt too loud. He looked at the floor and nodded once. Then he left with his friends. I stood there and watched the street until the hallway emptied. That night, I walked by the river. The water carried the day away. I thought of the video and of the steady look in Margaret's eyes. She had set a path between us. It was narrow, and it was hard. It was still a path. Weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and late nights at the warehouse. Eleanor delivered folders stacked with contracts and account numbers. Reminders that Margaret's trust in me was more than sentiment. It was responsibility. I signed where she told me. Listened to advisors speak of royalties and assets. And all the while thought of one thing: how little those numbers meant. If my son could not look me in the eye. I called him once. He let it ring. I wrote him a letter but never mailed it. I told myself to give him space. Yet each morning I checked my phone, hoping. The silence became a weight I carried to work, to bed, to every corner of my life. Then one evening, the phone did ring. His name lit the screen. For a moment I could not move. When I answered, his voice was smaller than I remembered. "Dad," he said. And the word cracked like ice. "I need to talk." "'Kay." We met at a diner outside town. The kind with neon lights that buzzed in the dark. He slid into the booth across from me. His eyes tired. For a long time he stirred his coffee without drinking it. Finally, he whispered, "I was wrong. About you. About her. About everything." "Kay." I wanted to reach across the table. But I stayed still. He spoke of the lawsuit. How it drained him. How anger had eaten away at what little peace he had. He admitted he thought winning would fill the hole she left. But it hadn't. He said he was lost. I told him I didn't want his apology. I wanted his time. A walk. A dinner. A chance to start again. I told him Margaret had believed in him, even when she chose hard words in her will. I told him the inheritance was not punishment, but an invitation. He listened, his eyes wet, his lips trembling. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" he asked. The question was a knife and a salve at once. I said yes. Proud for every step he took on his own. Proud for this night. For choosing to sit across from me instead of turning away. Proud because even broken people can learn to heal. We left the diner in silence. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain. He hugged me for the first time in years. His shoulders shook. I held on, not caring who saw. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened Margaret's last manuscript. Pages filled with her voice, her hope, her grief. At the end, a line underlined twice. "Teach him that love is work, not gift. Teach him that forgiveness is not weakness, but strength." I did. I closed the folder and wept until the room grew quiet. Then I stood, opened the window, and let the river air in. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like the beginning of something fragile, something worth tending.